Intimate partner violence has long occurred and is not a new thing. It has affected the majority of the women. Domestic violence, DV, is often utilized interchangeably with IPV as it has shown a common mechanism which involving physical, emotional and psychological, sexual abuse, etc. by the abuser, also known as former or current intimate partner. According to the statistic, the number of domestic violence cases has risen from the year 2000 with approximately 3,468 to 5,421 in the year of 2018 in Malaysia. From the reported cases, females recorded the highest number as victims who were exposed to violence compared to male, with 94.8% and 5.2% respectively. Numerous research found that the highest number of females as victims of violence has resulted from the patriarchal beliefs known as male dominance, which has evolved in 20th century, and it is still being held by the society globally, which resulted in male-dominate female as a normative culture. On the other hand, some victims have shown in a previous research or cases reported to choose to stay this abusive and violent relationship rather than leave this relationship. Many professional and non-professional parties or public are often raised countless questions such as, why do victims choose to stay? Why don't they just leave this relationship? Are they deeply in love with their abuser, etc. And even sometimes our body gesture and overall of our reaction might pose a corresponding to making such a comment or statement to the victims without our consciousness or awareness. Yet, we still don't really understand why they are still engaging in this violence or abusive relationship. By questioning why do they stay, why do they choose to stay, it's like hinted at the victim's fault for experiencing the violence and deciding to stay, as they can just leave or end this relationship at any time. Instead, many researchers in today's era have begun to focus on what are the barriers that affect victims to stay in this abusive or violence relationship, or what are the barriers for them to leave this relationship. As a result, more comprehensive barriers have been identified, such as the abuser not allowing them to live, or threatening children, other family members' life, victims' financial dependency, abuser poses dangerous acts, etc. So, researchers noted that living is not merely an event, but it is a long-term process that involves victims of psychological and emotional to decide a better solution and decision to stay or leave this abusive or violent relationship. Moreover, past research emphasizing on the psychological aids or assistance is crucial for the victims, as they are being abused by the abuser with the psychological abuse method, which impacts their emotional state and mental processes that hinder them from making a better decision or solution. Generally, forms of abuse or violence often involve physical, psychological, emotional, sexual activities, financial, etc. About 93% of victims experience of form of psychological abuse the most compared to other forms of abuse. As a result, the majority of the victims might suffer with the symptom of mental health problems such as depression, post-traumatic disorder, etc. Past research has conducted that PIV severely impacts victims psychologically, yet to date no research have mainly conducted research on how these psychological barriers impact the victim's decision to stay or live in an abusive relationship. Thus, as a helping professional help working in the mental health field, it's important to understand what are the psychological barriers faced by the victims in order to effectively provide a proper intervention, psychological and emotional support to the victims. Maslow's theory presents his hierarchy of needs in a pyramid shape, with basic needs at the bottom of the pyramid and more high-level intangible needs at the top. A person can only move on to addressing the higher-level needs when their basic needs are adequately fulfilled. The first of the eight-driven lower needs on Maslow's hierarchy are physiological needs. These most basic human survival needs include food and water, sufficient rest, clothing and shelter, overall health and reproduction. Maslow states these basic physiological needs must be addressed before humans move on to the next level of fulfillment. Next, among the low-level needs is safety. Safety needs include protection from violence and theft, emotional stability and well-being, health security, and financial security. The social needs on the third level of Maslow hierarchy relate to human interaction and are the last of so-called lower needs. Among these needs are friendships and family bonds, both with biological family, including parents, siblings, children, and chosen family, spouses, and partners. The higher needs, beginning with self-esteem, are ego-driven needs. The primary elements of self-esteem are self-respect, the belief that you are valuable and deserving of dignity, and self-esteem confidence in your potential for personal growth and accomplishments. Self-actualization describes the fulfillment of your full potential as a person, sometimes called self-fulfillment needs. Self-actualization needs occupy the highest spot on Maslow's pyramid. Self-actualization needs include education, skill development, the refining of talents in areas such as music, athletics, design, cooking and gardening, caring for others, and broader goals like learning a new language, traveling to new places, and winning awards. Past research shown victims that financially dependent on the perpetrator are less likely to leave, didn't fulfill the first stage, thus decide to stay. Higher educated victims are more likely to leave because they're able to fulfill all stages, thus they are more motivated to leave. The longer the time of the victims being in the IPV relationship, the lower the help-seeking behavior will be performed. From the Maslow model, it can be seen that not only basic needs are important, however, psychological needs is also an essential for the victims to make decisions to leave or stay in an abusive, violent relationship. Thus, we have examined the psychological barriers by using the existing model and theory that might affect victims to make decisions to stay or leave this relationship. There are known as intimate partner violence stigmatization model identifies how three stigma components hinder IPV help-seeking behaviors, such as cultural stigma, stigma internalization, and anticipated stigma. Cultural stigma highlights societal beliefs and delegitimize people experiencing abuse. Stigma internalization involves the extent to which people come to believe that negative stereotypes about those who experience IPV may be true of themselves. Anticipated stigma emphasizes concern about what will happen when others know about the partner abuse, for example, rejection. Research shown cultural stigma and cultural belief, such as Chinese in divorce equals to shame. Once you choose to marry to this person, then you need to accept all his good and bad, including his abusive behavior. It is disgraceful for children to grow up in an incomplete family, thus cannot leave the relationship in order to have a complete family. Stigma internalization is known as believing, while anticipated stigma is worry about being rejected by the society, thus fear of facing unknown future. Next, psychosocial readiness. I decide is a theoretical informed by the psychosocial readiness model, PRM. The PRM takes into account the fluid and changeable nature of women's journey towards positive action for safety and well-being. It focuses on three key internal factors such as awareness, self-efficacy, and perceived support, and suggests that intervention needs to act on these elements in order to facilitate movement along the change continuum. At the same time, the model acknowledges the effects of external factors that are outside a woman's control, and these can either promote or hinder her level of readiness for change. Past research shown the victims who receive more support is likely to leave the relationship. Social isolation has a positive relationship with the likelihood of victims to leave. Next, stages of change. The TTM, also known as Stage of Change model, has been successfully applied to a range of health behaviors, including smoking cessation, condom use, exercise, mammography screening, diabetes control, drug use, adherence, and eating practices. Next, learned helplessness. According to the American Psychological Association, learned helplessness occurs when someone repeatedly faces uncontrollable, stressful situation, then does not exercise control when it comes available. They have learned that they are helpless in that situation and no longer try to change it even when change is possible. Once a person having this experience discovers that they cannot control events around them, they lost motivation. Even if an opportunity arises that allows the person to alter their circumstances, they do not take action. Individuals experiencing learned helplessness are often less able to make decisions. Besides, traumatic bonding. A trauma bond is a connection between an abusive person and the individual they abuse. It typically occurs when the abused person begins to develop sympathy or affection for the abuser. This bond can develop over days, weeks, or months. Not everyone who experiences abuse develops a trauma bond. Stockholm Syndrome is a specific type of trauma bond. While this term typically refers to someone who is captive developing positive feelings for their captors, this dynamic can occur in other situations and relationships. In 2018, research investigating abuse in athletes suggests that Stockholm Syndrome may begin when a person experiencing abuse begins to rationalize the action of the theories and models that have been discussed earlier. The current research has an important implication for the counselor and also to the society as a whole. In the counseling field, taking time to understand and respect the patient's, victims, survivors' problems and barriers from different perspectives is much crucial to be able for the counseling session to work effectively. First implications are theoretical. The theories used in current research findings, such as Maslow theory, IPV stigmatization model, psychosocial readiness, stages of change, learned helplessness, and traumatic bonding, acts as an opening to broaden the perspective of the literature and for the future research in the mental health related field, especially in the counseling field, to conduct further research and more in-depth in this topic in order to be able to help more victims free from the abusive or violence relationship in Malaysia. Second implication are practical and recommendations. The current research allows to raise awareness, sensitivity, responsiveness, and better understanding of the psychological barriers among the society as a whole, as it is known as one of the most important barriers that influence victims' decision making to live or stay in an abusive or violent relationship that have been neglected in previous research in Malaysia. As the behavior of abusive or violence used by the abuser to victims often resulted in severely impacted psychological and mental health problems among the victims, automatically hinder their decision to leave this relationship with or without consciousness. IPV is no longer known as a private or family matter, but it has to do with the society as a whole, where putting more focus on advocating the community-based helping centers such as intervention hotline services, etc., should be made in order to create a normative pro-social behavior culture by utilizing the psychological barriers model in this current research to provide ineffective psychological support to the victims. Eventually, it creates a sense of safety among the victims of violence to be able to reach help more effectively from the society that are free from stigmatization, stereotype which involving cognition, prejudice which involving feelings, and discrimination involving behavior. Besides, mental health professionals such as counselors should be more sensitive, recognize and aware of the importance of non-judgmental behaviors or attitude, and assure that the confidentiality and safety for the victims as it is able to build trust and good rapport with them. Past research has shown the majority of victims who live in an abusive or violent relationship frequently suffer loss of self, such as self-respect and self-worth. As the mental health professionals such as counselors can help the victims in modifying or reframing their undesired negative thoughts and feelings based on every perspective of the psychological barriers that resulted from the abusive or violent relationship. Gradually, counselors were able to help victims to gain back their self-worth through assisting the victims in refusing and put down the burden of shouldering the responsibility of abuse. Most importantly, counselors need to be aware that they should not impose their own values or beliefs onto the victims in making decisions to live or stay in an abusive or violent relationship. Instead, by highlighting or assisting the victims to obtain decision-making at best of victims' choices based on their life uniqueness of circumstances and weighting or comparing the benefits or gains against the adverse or losses correlated with victims' choice. Thank you everyone for listening. My name is Cecilia Yap Ailian, and Ang Sei Ping from Semester 1.